Have you ever met a woman who lives alone, not by accident, but by choice? No partner, no explanations, no apologies, just a quiet presence that somehow fills the room more than noise ever could. At first, society might label her lonely, too proud, maybe even broken. But what if those labels are just projections, reflections of our own discomfort with someone who refuses to fit into the mold? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." And perhaps that's why a woman who chooses solitude unsettles so many. She stands as a mirror not of lack, but of wholeness. A living reminder that the most powerful kind of love begins not with another person, but with the self. Because let's be honest, in a culture that idolizes relationships and romantic validation, choosing to walk alone can feel almost rebellious. Yet for some women, it's not rebellion. It's awakening. Imagine a woman who once gave her all her love, her energy, her time to relationships that only left her more fragmented. She tried to shrink herself to fit into someone else's expectations. She silenced her intuition to maintain peace. She stayed in places where her soul whispered leave, until one day she didn't. She stopped trying to be chosen, and instead, she chose herself. This isn't a story of bitterness. It's a story of clarity. It's not a rejection of love, but a refinement of what love should mean. And the truth is, this kind of woman doesn't need saving. She doesn't wait for someone to fix her, because she's already done the inner work. She's already walked through the fire of self-discovery and come out not empty, but full. And now, here's the deeper truth. Her solitude is not a void. It's a sanctuary. Her silence is not absence. It's presence. Her standards are not arrogance. They are the result of years spent learning what she will no longer accept. But this path of individuation, as Jung would call it, isn't always easy. It comes with doubts, with judgment, with nights where even the strongest spirit questions everything. And yet, she walks it anyway, not because she has to, but because she chooses to. So if you've ever wondered why some women walk alone with their head held high, this video is for you, because maybe, just maybe, you're not here by accident. Maybe something inside you is also longing for a kind of freedom that no relationship can provide. A kind of love that starts with knowing who you are. And if that resonates, even a little, then stay with us. Because what you're about to discover may not only explain her journey, it might illuminate your own. We live in a world where women are still expected to explain themselves when they choose solitude. She must have been hurt. She's probably just picky, or worse, she'll regret it. But what if none of that is true? What if the woman who lives alone isn't running from something but returning to herself? Carl Jung believed that everything we deny in ourselves becomes part of what he called the shadow, the hidden unconscious parts of our psyche we're too afraid to face. For many women, this shadow has been shaped by centuries of conditioning to be agreeable to be chosen to sacrifice their identity for the comfort of others, to smile when they want to scream, to stay when they should leave. So when a woman finally steps away, not just from a relationship, but from the need for one, she isn't rejecting love. She's confronting the shadow. She's peeling off the layers of societal roles that once defined her worth: girlfriend, wife, caretaker, good girl. And in that peeling, there is pain, but there is also power. Because the moment she says, "I'd rather be alone than half alive," she begins a process Jung called individuation, the journey towards psychological wholeness. Individuation is not self-help. It's not about becoming better. It's about becoming real. It's the integration of opposite strength and softness, light and shadow, logic and intuition. It's what happens when a woman stops performing and starts listening to her silence, her scars, her truth. This journey often begins not with confidence, but with collapse. A breaking point. A moment where everything she's been taught about happiness, about being chosen, about relationships, being the ultimate goal no longer makes sense. And in that space, she meets the stranger within the woman she was before the world told her who to be. At first, this space feels empty, frightening, even shameful. Friends might ask, "Aren't you afraid of being alone forever?" Family might worry. Strangers might pity. But she knows deep down that solitude is not a curse. It's a crucible. Because here's the truth. Loneliness is not the absence of people. It's the absence of connection to oneself. And this woman, she is no longer willing to trade pieces of her soul just to feel less alone. She's not cold, she's healing. She's not broken, she's rebuilding. She's not behind, she's becoming. And this becoming is sacred. In a culture that glorifies productivity, attention, and external validation, the woman who steps back is often seen as a threat. Why? Because she cannot be easily manipulated. She no longer responds to fear-based messaging. You're running out of time. You need someone to complete you. Don't be too much. She hears these voices, but she no longer obeys them. Instead, she begins asking different questions. What do I want? Not. What was I told to want? What does love mean to me? Not what society defines it as. Who am I when no one is watching? These aren't the questions of someone giving up. They're the questions of someone waking up. And in this waking, her energy changes. She no longer seeks the spotlight, yet she radiates. She no longer chases love, yet she attracts truth. Not because she's trying harder, but because she's aligned. To an outside world obsessed with appearances, this woman might seem invisible. But to those who have begun their own journey inward, she is magnetic. Because you can feel it in her presence, she's done the work. She's faced the abandonment, the anxiety, the aching need to be chosen. She's cried in silence, danced in solitude, healed without applause. And from those depths, she has emerged, not perfect, but whole. This doesn't mean she has all the answers. In fact, she's learned to live with uncertainty. She's made peace with the fact that growth often comes with grief, that the road inward is narrow and few will understand it. But that's okay. She's not walking this path for validation. She's walking it for truth, for peace, for herself. And that in itself is revolutionary. So if you've ever looked at a woman who lives alone and wondered, how does she do it? The answer is this. She chose the harder path, the quieter one. The one that doesn't promise fairy tales but offers freedom. The one that doesn't come with a partner but comes with power. Not power over others, but power over herself. And in today's world, that's the kind of power we should stop fearing and start honoring. There comes a moment in some women's lives when the silence becomes louder than the noise. Not because the world stopped speaking, but because she finally began to listen. Not to the opinions of others, not to the ticking of someone else's clock, but to herself. Carl Jung often warned that what we fail to make conscious will rule us from the unconscious, and we will call it fate. For many women, this fate has looked like repeated relationships rooted not in love, but in survival. Attachments forged in childhood and mistaken for chemistry. Validation mistaken for intimacy. Control mistaken for care. She didn't leave because she gave up on love. She left because she stopped confusing pain with passion. This kind of awakening doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It's quiet, like the gentle cracking of old armor, like the whisper of intuition that once begged for attention but was drowned out by the noise of approval seeking. It might look to the outside world like she suddenly changed, but in truth it was years in the making. Years of swallowing words, biting back needs, dimming light. Until one day she didn't. And what followed wasn't a breakdown, it was a breakthrough. Jung called this moment a psychic shift, when the ego begins to realize it is no longer the master of the psyche, when the soul demands a voice. For the woman who lives alone today, that shift was not gentle. It was born from disappointments that stopped wounding and started teaching. She started noticing pattern, how she was drawn to the emotionally unavailable, how she tolerated disrespect in the name of keeping the peace, how she held her breath in rooms where she deserved to breathe freely. Each realization was a thread unraveled from a fabric that never truly fit her. So she walked away. From the table where she was only served crumbs, from relationships where her presence was a convenience, from roles that made her smaller just to be accepted. But walking away wasn't about rebellion. It was about reunion with herself. The journey that followed was not romanticized. It was real. There were days she questioned everything. Nights she missed the warmth of being held. But even on those nights she did not betray herself for temporary comfort. Because she had learned any love that demands you abandon yourself is not love. It's dependence. In solitude, she began to confront the ghosts she had long avoided, the unmet childhood needs, the betrayals she excused, the ways she twisted herself to become more lovable. These weren't flaws. They were coping strategies, adaptive behaviors developed in environments that did not honor her wholeness. Jung taught that the path to integration requires a descent into the unconscious, and she did just that. She descended into her fears, her longings, her wounds. And slowly, she reclaimed the parts of herself she once discarded. Her anger no longer shameful, but sacred. Her boundaries not walls but doors she chooses to open or close. Her desires no longer repressed but revered. She no longer performs. She embodies. The woman who lives alone now doesn't do so to make a statement. She's not trying to prove anything. She simply understands that peace is more valuable than pretense. That presence is more nourishing than performance. That being chosen is meaningless if you have to shrink to stay chosen. She is no longer impressed by charm without character effort, without consistency, or promises without action. Her time is sacred now. Her space is intentional. She no longer entertains what disturbs her nervous system in the name of politeness. To some, she may appear distant, but distance is not indifference. It is discernment. You see, once you've lived through emotional exile, you become very careful about who you open your doors to. Once you've loved from your knees, you learn to stand. Once you've given away pieces of yourself for the illusion of connection, you learn to become whole and demand wholeness in return. This doesn't mean she doesn't feel. She feels deeply. She still longs to be loved, touched, chosen, but only by someone who understands that love is not ownership. It's not rescue. It's reflection. She wants a love that mirrors her growth, not her fears. A bond where silence is not awkward, but sacred. Where being seen doesn't mean being fixed. Until that love arrives, she will not wait. She will live. Fully, unapologetically, without compromise. And in a world that pressures women to define themselves through relationships, there is something quietly radical about a woman who defines herself through truth. To the untrained eye, the woman who lives alone might seem incomplete, as if her life is missing something essential, a romantic partner, a shared last name, a ring on her finger. But Jung would argue that what appears to be absence is often the presence of something deeper. In truth, this woman has not withdrawn from the world. She has withdrawn from the performance. She no longer plays the role society once demanded, the pleaser, the pursuer, the one who molds herself into whatever is needed just to be enough. She has stepped off the stage not out of defeat, but out of awakening. Carl Jung taught that every archetype has its shadow, and for centuries, the good woman archetype, nurturing, agreeable, self-sacrificing, has cast a long shadow. Its opposite lives in the women who refuse to be defined by compliance, women who step away from roles they never agreed to play, women who choose solitude not as escape, but as alignment. And that kind of choice, true autonomy, makes people deeply uncomfortable, because it calls into question the entire script. She is no longer bound by the fear of being alone because she has lived through it and discovered something most never dare to touch: the peace that comes from no longer betraying yourself. There is an ancient part of her that remembers the time before conditioning, a voice beneath the noise. The wild woman archetype that Jung's followers often speak of, instinctive, sovereign, and emotionally free. She's not wild in chaos, but in clarity. She does not seek attention, she seeks truth. She does not compete, she creates space. She does not chase, she calls in. And if she is alone, it is because she will no longer sit at tables where respect is not being served. This is not about pride. It's about energy. She has learned to feel the difference between performance and presence, between intention and manipulation. Her body now reacts to what her mind used to ignore. Her nervous system has become her compass. If she steps back from a connection, it's not to punish, it's to protect. If she says no, it's not rejection, it's refinement. If she doesn't respond, it's not silence, it's self-respect. And here's what's even more profound: she no longer apologizes for this. She no longer explains her choices to people who haven't earned the right to witness her, because she knows now that some people don't want connection, they want access, and she has become the gatekeeper of her own peace. This evolution isn't linear. There are days when doubt creeps in, nights when nostalgia knocks, moments when the old ache of wanting to be held resurfaces. But she no longer fills the void with distractions. She sits with it. She listens to what the silence is trying to say, because she understands now solitude is not emptiness, it is a mirror. It reflects what we need to face. And for this woman, that reflection has become her teacher. She sees the younger version of herself, the one who begged to be seen, who mistook attachment for love, who apologized for having needs, and she doesn't reject her. She embraces her. She integrates her. Because true healing, as Jung said, is not about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. That remembrance is her revolution, and in it, she has found a new kind of strength that does not roar, but radiates. She doesn't need to raise her voice to be heard. Her energy speaks first. People feel her before she enters the room. Not because she's flashy or loud, but because she's anchored. She belongs to herself. And that sense of inner belonging cannot be manufactured. It must be earned. Through pain, through truth, through choosing yourself again and again, even when it's misunderstood. The woman who lives alone is not waiting. She's becoming. Not softer, not harder, just truer. And the love she seeks, it must meet her there in truth, in presence, in freedom. Until then, she's not lonely. She's home. I've been taught often without words that a woman's story begins the moment she's chosen by a man, a partner, a title. But what if the real story begins when she chooses herself? Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And for so many women, that unconscious material has revolved around one haunting question: am I enough as I am? This question is often inherited, passed down like an invisible thread through generations. From mothers who silenced their desires, grandmothers who endured without being seen, and a lineage of women taught to equate love with sacrifice. But this woman, the one who lives alone, she chose to pause that narrative, not out of arrogance, not out of defiance, but out of an ancient instinct that whispered, "There's more to you than being needed." She began to examine the root systems of her beliefs. Why did she stay in places that hurt? Why did she feel guilty for having needs? Why did love always seem to require self-erasure? These weren't rhetorical questions. These were the raw edges of shadow work, what Jung described as the painful yet liberating task of meeting the parts of ourselves we've buried, denied, or disowned. And so she began the slow, sacred process of reparenting her inner child. That little girl who once thought love had to be earned, who mistook attention for safety, who believed silence kept her safe. She brought her back not to the past, but into the present, where she could finally be nurtured, not neglected. This woman didn't become strong overnight. Strength for her wasn't sculpted in gyms or sharpened through bravado. It was formed in moments of quiet refusal, in saying no when it would have been easier to say yes, in walking away when her heart still wanted to stay, in choosing stillness over chaos. And this emotional maturity, it's rare, it's uncomfortable, and it's powerful. Because in a world that romanticizes the chase and rewards the performance, emotional responsibility can look intimidating. But it is exactly what makes her magnetic. She no longer reacts to superficial charm. She responds to emotional presence. She's not drawn to intensity that burns quickly. She's drawn to steadiness that sustains. She doesn't need promises. She notices patterns. And patterns, as Jung knew, reveal more than words ever could. She sees the games before they're played. She senses inauthenticity before it speaks, not because she's jaded, but because she's aware. Awareness, after all, is her superpower. And that awareness has changed her entire relationship to love. She no longer views it as a prize to be won or a person to complete her. She views it as a space where two whole beings meet, not to fix, not to fill, but to flow together. A soul alliance where truth is more important than appearances, where presence is deeper than performance. But this kind of love, it's rare, and she knows it. That's why she no longer rushes, no longer lowers her standards to soothe loneliness, no longer plays small to avoid rejection. Because she's not afraid of being alone, she's afraid of abandoning herself. This distinction is key. Most people chase connection out of fear. Fear of aging alone, fear of missing out, fear of not being enough without someone else's reflection. But she doesn't live in fear. She lives in clarity, and clarity has taught her that it's better to be misunderstood than to be misused. It's better to be seen as distant than to be drained by demands. It's better to be alone in truth than together in illusion. To some, she may seem unapproachable, but that's only because she no longer speaks the language of desperation. She speaks the language of boundaries, of balance, of being whole. She doesn't need grand gestures. She needs consistency. She doesn't want someone who completes her. She wants someone who complements her wholeness. This is not a fantasy. It's a frequency. And until someone meets her thereon, that level of soul depth and presence, She is content in her solitude, because it is not lonely. It is sacred. She has become the woman who no longer waits to be chosen. She chooses with intention, with vision, with alignment. And that perhaps is the quiet revolution shaking the very foundations of how we define love. Most people don't even know the contract exists. It's never written, never signed. Yet from a young age, many women are handed it silently. Be pleasing, be chosen, be small enough to fit into someone else's story. Carl Jung called these unspoken agreements collective, unconscious patterns, deeply rooted behaviors and beliefs we inherit not just from family, but from culture itself. They shape our relationships, our roles, and even our self-worth. And we follow them not because we agree, but because we were never taught we could opt out. But this woman, the one who lives alone, she opted out. She broke the contract. She no longer believes that her value rises or falls based on whether someone claims her. She no longer trades emotional labor for scraps of affection. She no longer signs up to play roles in other people's unfinished stories. Instead, she wrote her own terms, not for attention, but for authenticity, not to provoke the system, but to preserve her soul. This wasn't an easy shift, because stepping outside of these unconscious agreements doesn't just challenge others, it challenges everything you thought you were supposed to be. For her, it meant dismantling the belief that loneliness was the worst fate. It meant realizing that the real danger wasn't being alone, it was being misaligned. So she stopped negotiating with what drained her. She stopped apologizing for her standards. She stopped accepting love that cost her peace. And most importantly, she stopped begging to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding her. This is the quiet internal revolution Jung spoke of, the turning inward, the integration of shadow and light, the discovery that peace is not found in the presence of others, but in the presence of your own wholeness. And in that solitude, something profound happened. She didn't become bitter. She didn't close off her heart. She expanded. She tapped into a kind of power that no longer needs to be loud to be strong. A power rooted not in dominance or control, but in alignment. Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." And that's exactly what she's doing. She is no longer a reflection of societal expectation. She is a reflection of her own truth. This truth lives in the way she chooses to walk away when something feels wrong, even if there's no explanation. To stay present in her own body, even when it aches with memory. To speak softly, but only when her words come from soul, not survival. And this truth has changed her orientation toward love. She no longer asks, "Will someone ever love me the way I deserve?" She now asks, "Will I continue to love myself enough not to settle?" That shift from external validation to internal reverence is the most radical transformation of all. Because she's no longer searching for someone to save her. She's searching for someone who sees her. And until that presence arrives, she is not in waiting. She is in living. This version of the feminine doesn't play by old rules. She doesn't perform vulnerability to get affection. She embodies it as her strength. She doesn't shrink to be more palatable. She expands, knowing that anyone who cannot hold her fullness was never meant to stay. To many, this may feel threatening, because she no longer fits the mold. She shatters it. And in doing so, she becomes something new, not better, not superior, but free. She is the woman who says no, not as rejection, but as protection. The woman who loves, but does not lose herself in loving. The woman who listens to the whispers of her intuition more than the noise of the crowd. This is the individuation Jung wrote about, not perfection, not purity, but integration, the return of all lost pieces, the ability to live in paradox strength with softness, solitude with love, stillness with fire. She is not waiting for life to begin. She is not holding her breath for someone to choose her. She is exhaling, finally, freely. Because the real love story here is not between her and someone else. It's between her and herself. And now that she has chosen herself, fully consciously, she will never again belong to anything less. Carl Jung once said that those who look outside dream, but those who look inside awaken. And that's what this journey has always been about. Not rebellion, not rejection, but awakening. The woman who lives alone without a boyfriend, without an explanation, without apology, is not lost. She is found, not in someone else's eyes, but in her own. She is not a symbol of lack. She is the living embodiment of wholeness. Because what she discovered in the silence, the solitude so many fear is not emptiness. It is clarity. It is peace. It is power. She no longer searches for someone to make her life feel full. Her life is full. She no longer bends her essence to be chosen. She chooses. And in that choice, she has dismantled 1,000 years of silent expectation. This kind of freedom can be difficult to witness, especially for those still living by invisible contracts, still performing roles they never consciously accepted. But that is the power of this woman. She holds up a mirror not to your appearance, but to your soul. And what she reflects back is a question: what if you didn't need to be fixed, rescued, or completed? What if the love you're seeking begins with the courage to stand alone? That question lingers. It lingers not because it demands an answer, but because it awakens something primal in you, something ancient, something real. You may not be her, not yet. But if something inside you stirred during this video, something quiet, deep, and hard to explain, then you are closer than you think. Closer to reclaiming your voice, closer to honoring your truth, closer to becoming a woman or a person who lives not in fear of being alone, but in awe of being fully yourself. That is the essence of Jung's philosophy, individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating every part of who you are, not just the light, but the shadow, not just the love, but the loneliness, not just the joy, but the wounds that shaped it. And when a person does that, when a woman does that, she no longer needs to be chosen, because she is. She is already her own home. So as you close this video, I invite you to pause. Let this message settle beneath the surface. Let it echo in the places that haven't been touched in a while. And ask yourself, what part of me is asking to be remembered, to be honored, to be loved, first by me? Let's continue the conversation. If something in this video spoke to you, if it reminded you of who you are or who you're becoming, share it in the comments. Your story might be the spark someone else needs. What part of this video resonated most with you? Was it the silence, the strength, the freedom? I'd love to know. And if you're ready for more content that dives deep into the psyche, into identity, into the kind of truth that transforms, subscribe to this channel. We're building something here, not just videos, but a space where awakening is welcome, where reflection is powerful, where being alone doesn't mean being lost. Subscribe, like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next journey inward. Because sometimes the most important path is the one we walk alone until we realize we were never truly alone to begin with. See you in the next one.